Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're gonna tackle a question you might not have even considered before.
Oh,
Is teaching, like actual teaching, is that becoming its own field of study?
like a science of teaching.
Yeah. Is it becoming a science?
Well, you're definitely onto something there. The article we're looking at today, it's pedagogy as a discipline, emergence, sustainability, and professionalization,
Mm.
and it really digs into this idea. Like is
Pedagogy.
yeah, the study of teaching, especially in higher ed, is it becoming like its own distinct discipline?
So it's not just about like being a good teacher, it's like researching and analyzing how to teach.
Right.
It's kind of meta, isn't it?
It is meta, and just like whatever field you're in, you've got your methodologies, your rules, even your power dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pedagogy, it's showing signs of developing those same things too.
So to figure out if something is a real discipline, like what are we even looking for?
Okay, so think of it like building a house, right?
Okay.
You need solid foundations.
Yeah.
And for a discipline, those foundations, those are things like shared methodologies, a sense of community among the experts, and even just like ways of recognizing who the masters are in the field.
Oh, okay. So like in cooking, you've got your Michelin star chefs or your James Beard Award winners, right? Those are the folks at the top.
Exactly.
But you also have like everyone using similar techniques, whether they're, doing French cuisine or molecular gastronomy or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the article is arguing we're starting to see in pedagogy.
Okay.
There's this growing trend towards evidence-based research in teaching. So think like data analysis, statistics, things that might sound familiar from your own field.
Right. But does that mean that like everyone gets to play in this evidence-based sandbox, or does that favor certain research approaches over others?
That's a great question, and it's a key point that the article brings up because this emphasis on certain types of research, particularly those rooted in social science, well, it could unintentionally create barriers for people from other disciplines.
Hmm.
It's kind of like having a club with really specific entry requirements.
Oh, okay. So if I'm like a history professor and I love teaching, I have a real passion for it, but my research isn't in social science, does that mean I'm like automatically out of the running to be a pedagogy expert?
Unfortunately, that is a real possibility, and it gets even more ironic when you consider that to really excel in research about teaching, you might need to actually step away from teaching in your original field.
Wait, hold on. That's like saying to become a master baker, you have to stop baking bread and just study flour.
Right. It's this fascinating paradox, and we see this trend reflected in things like the National Teaching Fellowship Scheme, NTFS in the UK, which awards grants specifically for research on teaching. It's a sign that pedagogy is becoming more professionalized.
Okay, so we're seeing pedagogy developing its own methods, its own like community of experts, but can this whole like pedagogy discipline, can that really last? Is it sustainable?
To answer that, I think we have to look at the bigger picture of higher education.
Okay.
Think about the emphasis on student satisfaction these days.
Right.
And on, proving value for money.
Right.
Well, suddenly teaching quality, that becomes a major concern. It's not just an afterthought anymore.
So colleges need to show that they're serious about teaching, which means they need people who can research and improve teaching, which is where pedagogy comes in.
Exactly. You've got it.
It's all connected.
It is.
But I'm sensing a but here.
Oh.
If this all becomes about like pleasing students and administrators, could pedagogy lose its edge? Could it lose its bite?
You're hitting on a really crucial tension that the article explores. If pedagogy becomes too fixated on, metrics and just kind of like appeasement, it risks losing its ability to question assumptions, to challenge the status quo. And that brings us to a really key concept here, critical pedagogy.
Now, before we dive into critical pedagogy,
Okay.
I want to go back for a second because we talked about how this potential discipline of pedagogy might be, exclusive in terms of research methods.
Right.
But is there a risk that it could become exclusive in other ways too? Like, could it end up only being relevant to a select few within academia?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that deserves more exploration. Could this focus on pedagogy as a separate discipline, could that actually create a divide between those who study teaching and those who actually do the teaching?
Exactly. Like, are the professors on the ground, are they going to feel like this research is totally out of touch with their reality?
Right.
And if so, what does that mean for the future of this whole thing?
These are really important questions, and I think
Yeah.
they highlight the delicate balance that pedagogy needs to strike, right?
Hmm.
On one hand, it needs to establish itself as a rigorous field of study,
Right.
but on the other hand, it needs to stay relevant and accessible to those who are actually on the front lines of education.
So we've got this potential new discipline. It's wrestling with its own identity,
Yeah.
trying to figure out its place in the world.
Yeah.
We've got this idea of critical pedagogy that's shaking things up. We've got geographical differences in how these ideas are even being talked about. It's a lot. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole, I think we need to tackle that idea you mentioned, critical pedagogy. What is that exactly?
So imagine yourself in a classroom setting. It's not just about the content being taught.
Okay.
It's about questioning the assumptions baked into that content, the power dynamics at play, even the structure of the classroom itself.
So it's not just how to teach, but like why we teach this way, and even who benefits from teaching this way.
You got it.
It's getting philosophical here, and that makes me wonder, like, how does this whole critical pedagogy thing, how does it play out differently in different parts of the world?
Oh, good point.
Because the article mentioned this contrast between the U.S. and the U.K.
Yes, yes. And that's a really interesting point. The article, it highlights how there's this vibrant debate about critical pedagogy happening in U.S. academia.
Yeah.
But in the U.K., it seems like the conversation's a bit more muted, a bit more subdued.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, why is there such a difference?
It's like they're speaking different languages over there.
Yeah.
But could that difference be like because of how their educational systems are structured? Like, is the U.S. system more decentralized,
Possibly, yeah.
which would allow for like more diverse approaches to pedagogy?
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, the structure of higher education in each country,
Yeah.
it could definitely play a role in shaping this conversation around critical pedagogy. It's a complex issue.
Okay. So we've got this emerging discipline of pedagogy. It's wrestling with its identity. It's trying to figure out where it fits. We've got this idea of critical pedagogy that's shaking things up, and then we've got these geographical differences in how those ideas are even being debated. It's a lot to process. But I think before we get ahead of ourselves here, we need to step back and ask, like, why should any of this matter to our listener?
To you.
To you. Like, why should you care about any of this?
That's a great point. And I think it's important to emphasize that this isn't just some abstract academic discussion. This has real-world implications, regardless of what field you're in. Because what we're really talking about here is how knowledge is created, how it's shared, and ultimately how it shapes our understanding of the world.
And whether we realize it or not, every field has its own kind of like unwritten rules of the game. It has its own assumptions, its own power dynamics, just like the ones that we're seeing play out in the world of pedagogy.
All right.
So the next time you come across, information or expertise, think about this deep dive.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, who's deciding what counts as knowledge, whose voices are being heard, and what are the stakes if we don't question those things.
Those are powerful questions to consider. And I think they underscore the importance of critical thinking, which is a skill that's essential in any field, any aspect of life, really.
Absolutely. So while this deep dive might be focused on pedagogy, the insights we're getting here, they can be applied far beyond the classroom. So stay tuned, because we're just getting started. We've got more to uncover about this fascinating world of pedagogy and what it means for all of us.
All right, so we've established that pedagogy, the study of teaching, is on this journey to becoming its own distinct discipline.
Yeah.
It's like it's trying to break free from under the shadow of all these other fields and say, hey, I'm important too.
Exactly. But that journey, it's not a straight line, is it? It's full of twists and turns, challenges, opportunities.
It's like navigating a complex maze or maybe even like climbing a mountain. You got to hit those base camps along the way. What are some of those base camps that pedagogy needs to reach on its climb to becoming a recognized discipline?
Well, one crucial base camp is establishing boundaries.
Defining what pedagogy is and what it isn't T. Otherwise, it risks getting lost in this vast landscape of of academic disciplines.
Right. It needs its own like territory, its own distinct like
Right.
flavor, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the article points out that even the definition of pedagogy is often debated.
Mm.
You know, it could be kind of fuzzy, which, when you think about it,
Yeah.
kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Teaching and learning, these are messy, complex processes.
Yeah, it's not like baking a cake where you follow the recipe and boom, you're done.
Right.
There's a lot more nuance involved.
Exactly. You've got the students' backgrounds, the teacher's personality, the subject matter, the social and political context.
Right.
All these factors are swirling around, influencing the learning process.
And those contexts, those are always changing, which means pedagogy has to be adaptable.
Right.
Almost like a chameleon, right?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Shifting its colors to blend in with its surroundings.
Yeah, pedagogy needs to be flexible.
Yeah.
You know, it needs to constantly evolve to keep pace with the changing world. But even as it evolves, it still needs to hold on to its core principles.
Yeah.
Its own like distinct identity.
So back to those base camps we were talking about.
Okay.
How is pedagogy carving out its own space? Like how is it asserting its own identity?
Well, one way, as we've touched upon, is by developing its own rigorous research methodologies.
Right.
This is how it can, gain respect and recognition within the larger academic community.
Right, because if you want to play in the big leagues, you gotta have your own set of rules, your own way of doing things.
Exactly. And the article highlights another important step towards professionalization, and that's things like those teaching awards that we discussed. Specialized journals dedicated to pedagogy research, conferences where experts can gather and share their work.
It's like building a whole infrastructure around pedagogy.
Yeah.
Creating this sense of community, this shared purpose.
Precisely. But that raises a question.
Okay.
Who gets to be a part of this community? Who gets to decide what counts as good pedagogy research?
So we're back to that potential for exclusivity again, because now we're not just talking about teaching, we're talking about the study of teaching.
Right.
Which means publishing papers, competing for funding, all of those academic hoops you got to jump through.
And that can create a kind of hierarchy even within pedagogy itself. The article, it mentions how certain research methods, particularly those from the social sciences, those are often favored.
Which means if you're a brilliant artist and you want to research how to teach art effectively, but you don't have that social science background, you might be at a disadvantage.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it really underscores the need for pedagogy to be inclusive. To value diverse perspective, diverse approaches.
Yeah.
We need artists and scientists and historians and everyone in between contributing to this field.
So it sounds like pedagogy is walking this tightrope, right? Trying to balance its desire for recognition as a distinct field with the need to stay connected to the real world of teaching.
That's a great way to put it. It needs to avoid becoming this ivory tower, detached from the realities of the classroom.
Yeah. Because what's the point of all this research if it doesn't actually help people become better teachers?
Right.
If it doesn't benefit students in some tangible way.
You're hitting on a crucial point.
Yeah.
And that's where the concept of critical pedagogy comes back into play, because it's not just about finding the most efficient techniques or measuring outcomes. It's about asking those bigger questions about the purpose of education.
Yeah.
The values that we're instilling in students, the kind of society we're shaping.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of critical pedagogy. Can you give us a concrete example of what this might look like in action?
Okay, so imagine a history class.
Yep.
A teacher using critical pedagogy, they wouldn't just present historical facts as neutral, as objective.
Right.
They would encourage students to think about, whose perspectives are being represented, whose voices are missing, how power dynamics have shaped historical narratives.
So it's about teaching history with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
Helping students see that history isn't just this set of fixed facts, but But it's an ongoing interpretation, a story being told from a particular point of view.
Exactly. It's about empowering students to think critically, to question assumptions, to challenge dominant narratives.
Yeah.
And those are skills that are valuable far, far beyond the history classroom.
Those are life skills, right?
They are, yeah.
And that brings us back to the article's comparison of U.S. and U.K. approaches to pedagogy.
Okay.
Like, why is there such a difference in how they engage with this whole critical pedagogy thing?
It's a complex issue, but the article it suggests that the U.S. it just has a more robust culture of debate and critique in academia.
Maybe it's something in the water over there. But seriously, what factors might contribute to that difference?
Well, one possibility is the structure of their higher education systems.
Yeah.
But the U.S. has a much more decentralized system.
Okay.
With a wider range of institutions.
Yeah.
And that diversity that could create more space for different pedagogical approaches to flourish.
Whereas the UK system is more centralized.
Right.
Maybe leading to more uniformity in teaching practices.
That's a possibility, and of course, it's not a simple black and white situation.
Right.
Even within each country, there's variations. Some institutions are more receptive to critical pedagogy than others.
So it's like a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Different levels of openness to challenging the status quo. But why is this comparison even important? Like, why should our listener care about what's happening across the pond?
It's a good question, and I think the answer is it highlights the fact that pedagogy isn't static. It's influenced by cultural and political factors. It's a global conversation, even if the volume of that conversation varies from place to place.
Okay, so we've got these big ideas swirling around, We've got the rise of pedagogy as a discipline, like the importance of critical thinking. Mm-hmm. The tension between, pleasing students and challenging assumptions.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process. And I'm wondering, like, how do we even begin to make sense of all this? Where do we go from here?
Well, that's where we get to the heart of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because what we're really talking about is the future of education.
Right.
How we equip students to navigate a world that's increasingly complex and uncertain.
And if pedagogy is going to be a force for positive change, it needs to be more than just a set of techniques, right? Or just a way to measure outcomes. It needs a soul, it needs a purpose that goes beyond just churning out graduates who can, get jobs.
It needs to nurture, critical thinkers, ethical citizens, creative problem solvers, people who can challenge the status quo, who can envision a better world.
Okay. That's inspiring. But let's be real for a second. The article also talks about some threats to the sustainability of pedagogy as a discipline. Like, what are those dark clouds on the horizon?
Well, some of those threats stem from the very forces that are driving its growth.
Okay.
For example, the pressure to produce quick results, to show immediate value for money in education.
That good old short-termism, always lurking in the shadows, ready to squash any long-term vision.
Exactly. If pedagogy gets too caught up in proving its worth in purely economic terms, it risks losing sight of its deeper goals. Mm-hmm. It's like that saying, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Right. You start prioritizing the metrics over the actual learning and growth that's happening in students. It's like judging a cake solely on how perfectly round it is, rather than how delicious it tastes.
Precisely. Another threat is the ongoing tension between teaching and research.
Yeah.
Especially in universities that prioritize research output above all else.
It's that age-old battle between the thinkers and the doers, right? Like they're on opposite sides of campus. They rarely interact.
And that can make it really tough for pedagogy to gain legitimacy within those research-focused environments.
Yeah.
If teaching is viewed as secondary to research, then pedagogy, the study of teaching, is viewed as even further down the totem pole.
It's like the forgotten stepchild of academia. but here's where things get really interesting. The article actually suggests that one way to strengthen pedagogy as a discipline is to separate it further from those traditional disciplines. It sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
But the argument is that if pedagogy is constantly being judged by experts in other fields,
right,
it won't be able to develop its own rigorous standards and methods.
It needs its own space.
Yeah. So it's like saying, hey, literature professors, you stick to analyzing Shakespeare. Right.
Let the pedagogy folks figure out how to teach Shakespeare effectively.
Yes. Yeah. It's about giving pedagogy the space to define itself, to develop its own unique expertise, without being overshadowed by other fields.
But wouldn't that risk creating an even bigger divide between theory and practice?
Yeah.
Between those who study teaching and those who actually do the teaching?
It's a valid concern, and I think it highlights the delicate balance that pedagogy needs to strike. Yeah. It needs to carve out its own space, but it also needs to remain relevant and useful to those who are, on the front lines of education.
So it's like this dance, right?
Yeah.
A constant negotiation between independence and interdependence.
Right.
Pedagogy needs to find its own rhythm, but still stay in sync with the broader world of teaching and learning. That's a great way to put it. And the outcome of this dance, that's far from certain.
Yeah.
But one thing's clear, the stakes are high.
Yeah.
The future of education, that hinges on how these tensions play out.
It's like we're at this crucial turning point
Mm-hmm.
where the path that pedagogy takes, that's going to have ripple effects throughout society. But before we get too overwhelmed by the magnitude of all of this, let's bring it back to our listener, you. Because even if you're not a teacher or an academic, this conversation has implications for your own life and work.
Absolutely. Whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or an entrepreneur, the insights we're gleaning here, these can help you think differently about how knowledge is created and shared within your own field.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive, I want you to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what are the rules of the game in your profession? Who are the gatekeepers of knowledge, and how can you as an individual contribute to a more critical, a more inclusive approach to learning and growth?
Okay, so we've covered a lot, right? We talked about the nuts and bolts of what makes something a discipline,
right?
And we even got into the kind of the philosophical side of critical pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quite the journey.
It has, but we're not quite done yet. We still need to explore what this all means for you, the listener,
right?
Regardless of what field you're in.
Right, because it's easy to get lost in the academic jargon and forget that these ideas have real world implications for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think the article's emphasis on critical pedagogy, that's where it becomes really crucial.
Okay.
Because this isn't just some abstract theory.
Right.
It's a way of thinking. It's a lens through which we can view the world and our place in it.
Okay. I'm ready for my critical pedagogy crash course. All right, give me the elevator pitch. Why should I care about this even if I'm not a teacher?
Because critical pedagogy at its core, it's about empowering individuals to think for themselves, to question assumptions, and to challenge the status quo. And those are skills that are valuable in any profession, in any aspect of life, really.
So it's not just about classrooms and textbooks. Mm-hmm. It's about being an active, engaged learner out in the world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that knowledge isn't, it's not static.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving, and that there are multiple perspectives on every issue, even those that seem straightforward.
Which means we need to be aware of our own biases, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ways that our own experiences and assumptions shape how we see the world.
Precisely. And critical pedagogy gives us the tools to examine those biases, to deconstruct those assumptions, and to engage in dialogue with those who hold different views. It's instead of just accepting information at face value, we're encouraged to dig deeper, to ask those uncomfortable questions, to challenge the truth as it's presented to us.
And that can be a really powerful process, both personally and professionally. It can lead to new insights, to innovative solutions,
mm-hmm.
and ultimately to a more just and equitable world.
Okay, I'm convinced critical pedagogy is officially on my to-do list. But let's get practical for a second. How can we actually cultivate this critical mindset in our everyday lives? What are some concrete steps that we can take?
Well, one simple yet powerful step
mm-hmm.
is to just start questioning the sources of information that you encountered. Who's who's presenting the information, what are their motivations,
Mm-hmm.
what perspectives might be missing or underrepresented.
It's like being a detective,
Yeah, yeah.
looking for clues, trying to piece together the bigger picture.
Exactly. And another important step is to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Okay.
Read articles and books from authors with different backgrounds and viewpoints. Listen to podcasts, watch documentaries,
Yeah.
things that challenge your preconceived notions.
So it's about expanding our horizons,
Yeah.
stepping outside our comfort zones,
Mhm.
and engaging with ideas that might make us feel a little uncomfortable at first.
Right, because that's where the real learning happens.
Exactly.
And as we cultivate this critical mindset, it's important to remember that it's not about, winning arguments or proving other people wrong.
Yeah.
It's about engaging in respectful dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
listening to understand, finding common ground, even amidst disagreements.
It's about recognizing that we all have something to learn from each other,
Yeah.
even if we don't see eye to eye on everything.
Right.
And that humility, that willingness to be wrong.
Right.
That's essential for growth.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth emphasizing that critical pedagogy, it's not just about individual growth,
Right.
It's also about collective action, about working together to create a more just and equitable society.
It's about recognizing the power dynamics at play in our institutions, in our communities, in our world,
Mm-hmm.
and using our critical thinking skills to challenge those dynamics, to speak up for those who are marginalized, and to advocate for change.
Because ultimately, education isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about using that knowledge to make a difference in the world.
So there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the world of pedagogy, it's come to an end. We've explored the emergence of pedagogy as a potential discipline, the importance of critical thinking, and the challenges and opportunities facing this evolving field. But more importantly, we've uncovered how these ideas can be applied to our own lives, regardless of our professions or backgrounds.
Remember, critical pedagogy, this isn't just for academics. It's for everyone. It's a way of being in the world. It's a commitment to lifelong learning. And it's a call to action to create a more just and equitable future.
So go forth and be critical, be curious, and be the change you want to see in the world.